Hey folks, welcome to the last Matt only episode for a while. Apologies for that. We're going to have some actual interesting people in here now that holidays and all my medical travels are done for a bit. Today I really want to give a shout out to the Howling Place, new group on Facebook. It's a men only group of cancer support, and it is fantastic. Many thanks to Joe, Trevor, and Rob for administrating it, and it's growing. I've been in some of the bigger ones, Town and such. This has been the most entertaining, meaningful, and most interactive. So major props to you guys for putting this together. One of the things that came up early on, it's in the first few posts, were whiskey reviews. So I go to MD Anderson, Houston, Texas, and we're right next to Total Wines, and we visit there. As you'll learn from the podcast that my wife is quite the expert mixologist. And in honor of you gents, I picked up the Offerman edition Lagavulin, 11 years old. This is a single malt Scotch, and I'm a fan of Nick Offerman, not just his Ron Swanson character, but the man himself. And this is a limited edition. And if you find yourselves in West Texas at any point, swing by, join the podcast. And if not, we'll drink it in your honor. I'm going to wait until I get some other guys in here that are of the right palate to enjoy that. Today is Leinenkugel's Grapefruit Shandy. Great for breakfast. So I don't do a lot of episodes about cancer, but this is an important one that I really want people to understand. This is about clinical trials and insurance, and I've been bitching about it on Facebook and other places. So my insurance will not pay for clinical trials. We think my wife's probably won't. And I found out a couple of my friends from my county government job have faced this too. So I want to be really clear. I want everybody to understand what's going on here, and I want you to look over your policy and your supplements. Quick rundown of my case. I was diagnosed with cancer, colon cancer in 2013. And I went through the initial chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, more chemo, and I was fine. They couldn't find any disease until 2018. The disease had grown back in a place that's hard to see on a CT scan. And it was pretty much out of the bag, and went through various treatments, wound up with spots in my lungs and peritoneum, and that's just the kind of mesh that holds your guts together. And it's all dangerous, but it's not like it's going to kill me in 6 months. It's inoperable, not necessarily curable, but essentially where it is, if it makes sense, where it is, it's not hurting anything yet. So they're doing what they can to sort of mitigate things. The problem with cancer, and we've talked about all the conspiracy theories and all this stuff about the disease. Chemotherapy does work, but it doesn't work on everything all the time. There are hundreds of types of cancers, and I believe thousands of types of chemotherapy, and given in various different ways. What medical science has come to now is genetic studies on how the disease works. Whereas, why didn't it kill everything? Well, because some of the cells were resistant to the treatment. And so they're small, they are weakened perhaps by the treatment, and they can lay dormant like mine did in my lymphatic system. So what goes on is they will try different things to see what affects that. And you may kill more, but there's some in there that still have different genetic mutations that make them resistant. And in my case, I took a drug it's an inhibitor class type of drug called Erbitux. It worked beautifully for about 3 months, and then it just stopped. And that's a result of the genetics of my disease. Well, what happened is there are similar drugs and then combinations of those that provide two more pathways for people who didn't do well on that drug. And the problem is they're in clinical trial. Clinical trial doesn't mean they're throwing random things at you, just using you as a guinea pig. They have to give it to a lot of patients to make sure it works and make sure it's it's safe and such. It's a very long process with different phases. And in my case, the people who are receiving it are doing well, the people with my genetics, better than anything that's currently out there. Not that there's nothing else for me, it's just this is the best option in a primary and a second opinion from doctors at 2 different hospitals. So what happened? I want to address real quick. Also, people have been asking me about right to try that was passed by President Trump. You're going to be amazed at this, that both President Trump and President Obama stepped up to seriously help people in situations like mine. I hope I'm not popping this mic too bad. I just changed the rake a little bit. Right to try is, it's a very long story. In short, as I understand it, it gets people into treatments earlier than normal or earlier than they typically could before. So it can kind of speed up the process and help some people early. It doesn't apply in my case. There's compassionate care and a few others that involve money that I'm not a candidate for. So what has gone on in my case and what's really strange is my health insurance. And my health insurance through the government is self-funded. So what that means, it's kind of like what you can do in Texas with car insurance. Most of us we buy insurance. We pay a company, annual, semi-annual fees or string the payments out monthly. And we are essentially gambling that we're going to not have an accident. And if we do, the insurance company pays for it out of their pocket. They make their money by taking in more than they give out. So insurance companies fight to not give it out when they can. So let's say you're extremely rich and you don't want to pay an insurance company. You can set up a program where you set aside a certain amount of funds depending on your situation and what you're insuring, and you can lock it away somewhere under contract, and it's used for insurance. So that means as long as that account is there and valid, you have an insurance card that meets state requirements, and you don't pay anybody because you have all this money that an insurance company would pay if you had a wreck. Instead, you're paying it. So it's kind of an oversimplified way of explaining how a government or a company becomes self-insured. So they hire a company that manages their thing and their insurance and pay it out. They take in the premiums and such. So it's like a regular network. I think ours is through Aetna, and they are the ones that get us through the networks of payment and such. But what happened here in my case, one of the things that the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, did was it put some things in there to help patients out, like taking pre-existing conditions and such. And one of the things was they had to cover clinical trials. Now, I'll get to that in a little bit. It sounds expensive and crazy, but give me a second. What happened with self-insured policies under some circumstances was they don't have to pay clinical trials as long as they meet some requirements, and things like not lowering your benefit, not reducing benefits since I think May of 2010, and not raising premiums. There are a few other things in there, but our government and other entities, like probably my wife's company, they have gone to very painstaking effort to make sure that they stay in these. So when you go in, when the doc says, hey man, I really want you in this clinical trial, this is great. And the other doc says, you know what, that is because this is working very well with your genetics. They just keep going further and further in this rabbit hole of discovering, well, this gene, this chemo works on this one and not this one. And it's very complicated. I have completely lost track of all the abbreviations and acronyms of all of my mutations. I should probably get them tattooed on my arm for when people ask me. But what goes on, well, maybe back up. So they said no to clinical trials. Now, here's what I don't understand and why it's this way. When you go into a clinical trial, the drugs are paid for. The actual stuff they shoot in your veins and everything that happens in the infusion room, there are trial sponsors that pay for this. I don't completely understand who that is. Pharmaceutical companies, investors, research hospitals, I don't know. But that doesn't cost you anything. It's free. What you do have to pay for is the accompanying care. So That means your doctor visits, that means your scans, that means your lab work. If you have to have biopsies, all that stuff. These are things that happen even if you're on an approved medication. Okay, so what I don't understand is this is cheaper. It is cheaper to fund a patient who is on trials than it is one that's on conventional therapy, because you're out the cost of the chemo. And I've had some that's cost thousands of dollars a dose that I would get every couple of weeks. So I don't understand that. It makes very little sense. So what I was told by my cancer hospital, by MD Anderson, was that the drugs are paid for, insurance won't cover anything else. So you're going to be out $100,000 roughly upfront every year. And so I stand a solid chance of lasting more than a year. So this would be a substantial chunk of my nest egg, and it's not a good gamble. And I'm going to explain that here in a minute. But there's a silver lining to my case, just so everybody understands. They're looking more carefully. One of the things about clinical trials is it could be two drugs that are approved that are now being used in a combination, if that makes sense. Okay. Let's say you're on, for instance, in one of the chemos I take causes extreme heartburn, and I can use two different types of medication to mitigate that. But there was a clinical trial to make sure that these two already approved and old medications were safe to use. So that's just an example. Fortunately, my docs have said, we think we've got a good shot with this medication that's approved, that's part of the study, but the study involves another drug, and that's neither here nor there. So it's not the end of the road for me. There are options, and you guys are gonna have to put up with my crappy podcast for longer. The money, here's where it's not a gamble. I'm sorry, here's where it's a gamble. And I have had a lot of people, wonderful, wonderful people wanting to hold fundraisers for me and all. My whole point here is awareness. I want you to look at your insurance and find out if it covers clinical trials, because if you get cancer, there's a solid chance that a clinical trial at some point, early or late, may be a good option for you. So check to make sure you have it. Check your kids, anybody in your family that's on insurance that doesn't really understand all this. Find out, because this may be very valuable information. Why will I not pay the fee, even though I can afford it? Why will I not take donations? It's $100,000 on something that could offer me, I don't know, maybe months, a few months more. And I understand it's a big deal, but I have a son with a disability that I've set up a trust fund. My family's going to need that money. There are other people in our family who are in rough situations with health and all that money would go for, and it would literally buy them more life than it would me or anybody else. When you're dealing with cancer, that first treatment, it's expensive, but it purchases a lot of life. And in terms of mine, it was years, and very, very good years. I went back almost 100% what I was. I'm on a break now. We'll be for about a month till we do know that whatever's going on, whatever's on the horizon as far as treatment, I have to be off of the stuff that I'm on now. So it takes a month to flush out. And it's been 2 weeks and a day since I had an infusion, and I feel a lot better. You can probably tell I sound better. It's not chewing up my voice. But that's the reason I'm not dealing with donations or anything, although I very much appreciate how wonderful everybody is. That money would buy a lot more life to someone else. So that's what it's all about. So it's really all I have to say about it. Just look and see what's going on. And we had supplemental policies available. I read through them. I didn't see it as worth the money based on being young and healthy at the time, my 20s or 30s. I'm sure it's gotten a lot better. Later on, when I looked at it, they told me if I made it to the 5-year mark, which I almost did by 6 months, that I could get the policy, and it would have saved us some money on our travel between Midland and Houston, which is 9 hours. That's For guys not in Texas, that's a thing. We have longer distances that you can drive and still stay in Texas. It would have helped, but I don't know the effect it would have on clinical trials. So have a look at your policy and check on that. I'm feeling great. I think I'm going to go hunting this weekend. Last couple of days of an extended season. We have some cool stuff coming up. I'm dragging in some local artists. We're going to also pull in the Skeptics Roundtable, and we're going to meet up tonight and probably kind of figure that out. We have a very special aviation archaeology episode coming up. We don't know when that is. Our guest fell ill and is in the hospital, but she should be okay. And we're also kicking around some photography. I've been doing a lot of AV work, recording and such, just as a side project for retirement, and run some interesting people and learn some interesting stuff. So that's all we have for now. Again, Wolfpack, you guys are the best. Thank you for contributing and hanging out. And if any of you want to get by here through West Texas and come sit down, look over our list. We talk about pretty much anything. We're just a bunch of weirdos that collect hobbies. So cheers. Thanks for watching. Give us a like and a subscribe, and have a great year. Thanks.